Good afternoon and welcome to this session on the role of religion and spirituality in U.S. foreign security assistance. My name is Mvemba Pezo Dizolele. I'm the Director and Senior Fellow at the Africa Program here at the CSIS. The role that religion plays is one that we don't talk about often in institutions like ours. Yet we know that culture surrounds itself with various pillars, one of which is religion and the other being spirituality. As the United States engage with various spaces around the world, those elements, namely spirituality and religion, are at the core of life. How people perceive themselves, how they see the world, is often determined by their beliefs. Today, we have invited Colonel Karen Meeker, the command chaplain at the U.S. Africa Command in Stuttgart, to discuss these issues that we think are of importance, not just in the relations that the United States builds around the world, but personal relations of soldiers within their own institutions, personal relations between leaders, and relations between countries. Colonel Meeker is a graduate of Bucknell University in Pennsylvania, where she holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Classics. She also has a Master's of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School. She has served in various capacities as a chaplain, ministering to the 45th Surgeon General of the U.S. Army and Command Chaplain of the U.S. Army Medical Command in Washington, D.C. She served with the Combined Joint Task Force 101 in Afghanistan. She served with the 101st Airborne Division in Fort Campbell. She's also served with U.S. Army Special Operations Command at Fort Bragg and with the 2nd Division in the Republic of Korea. Colonel Meeker, welcome to CSIS.
Thank you so much, Vemba. It's an honor to be with you. Huge fan of CSIS and the work that is done on behalf of our country. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you very much and welcome again. You know, security assistance is an important piece of U.S. foreign policy, especially in Africa. Yet this cooperation happens within a context of diversity of religious views and values. From your perspective as a chaplain, what does the space look like?
Well, it's, again, an honor to be with United States Africa Command based here in Stuttgart, Germany, at our headquarters and serving under the leadership of our combatant commander, General Michael E. Langley. And the mission that AFRICOM has is very high, noble mission to advance the values of our nation that are enshrined in our national security strategy and our national defense strategy, where our defense forces are really that defending our interests around the world, but also advancing the values of who we are as America. And as chaplains, we get to represent that and take a lead part in the values aspect of who we are and what we do and how we're doing that around the world. Dr. Hamry, I heard him say several years ago that the military is the keeper of our nation's values. And I would say that our chaplains are the vanguards of those values. So we take that as a very important mission of who we are and what we do. At AFRICOM, the mission is to come against those that counter transnational threats and malign actors through strengthened security forces and provide help in crises. AFRICOM takes a 3D approach, defense, diplomacy, and development. plus all our interagencies. So it's kind of like a 3D plus, where AFRICOM has an ambassador. We do a large diplomatic mission. Most of our military are spread throughout our embassies and offices of security cooperation. And then we also partner with USAID and all the interagencies. So we don't have a lot of boots on the ground, you might say, in the large continent of Africa. So we have to come together as a whole of government. And I say that because as chaplains, if we start to think about the very important role of values within what we do as a United States government and as Department of Defense, working with Department of State and USAID, then we can really bring some synergy to that effort. And I think it's a time, and this, just having this conversation today to think about the role of religion and spirituality in the complexity of the continent of Africa. That you look at Africa and it has just enormous possibilities, but also enormous challenges. And how do we bring solutions with our African partners, our friends, our colleagues across the continent of Africa? A vast land where you can put 3 United States and then some across the great land of Africa, where you have 19,000 miles of coastline, all kinds of minerals. You have a population that has the youngest average age in the world. And then religiously, could be argued as the most highly religious continent in the world. So as a chaplain, it's an exciting place to work, and to be able to be that ambassador, build those bridges and make those connections with religious leaders across the continent.
Colonel, you have described the complexity of it all. You have described the complexity of the mission of the command that you minister to, the Africa Command, but you have also described the complexity of the space that Africa is. As a chaplain, what is your role? What is the role of a chaplain? Our audience would like to know. We see chaplains at hospitals, but unless you serve in the military, then you don't really have a clear sense of why do we even need chaplains. Is not faith supposed to be something personal?
Yeah, it's a great question, because faith is something that is very personal to each individual, whether they decide to follow a certain belief or not, whether they're highly spiritual and part of a religious community. Those are very deeply personal choices that a person makes. As a chaplain in serving in the United States Armed Forces, each chaplain is endorsed by a Department of Defense endorser who represents a religious community, and all our chaplains are religious leaders. So that's what we are first, and then we come in to serve service members and their families and civilians in our military communities around the world. So our role is really twofold. We do direct support by performing within our own religious denomination, and we also provide by ensuring that those of other faiths have religious programming that meets their needs, both religiously and spiritually. I know some often question, how can you be a religious leader and serve in the military, in which its mission is often highly kinetic, and there are people that suffer greatly when there's military action. There's death and casualties. So how can a religious leader who represents peace serve in that capacity? I would say that our service members deserve to have religious leaders that are there for them wherever the nation calls them, sends them to serve. That's our first freedom in our nation, is to our free exercise of religion. And as military chaplains, that's our calling, is to go and serve without weapons. We're the only military personnel that go with no weapons wherever the military sends us on behalf of the nation. So it is, it can be challenging, I would say, as a religious leader, to go to those places in the world where conflict and suffering is happening, and work with our military. But our military deserve that support, and they need it. You know, there's research that shows that those who have a strong spiritual core have a 75% protective factor against the ills of life, the most difficult and demanding parts of life. If someone has a strong spiritual core, then they're more able to withstand the demands of military service. Some of the requests we get from our partners around the world is for help in sharing the training and the experience that our military chaplains have had these 250 years that our Army Chaplain Corps has served our United States Army. And we try to do that as often as we can, sharing those lessons learned. For our Chaplain Corps has been around much longer than many others around the world. And we have helped many nations to establish Chaplain Corps. And we're working with our partners in Africa to do that in different stages. And we share it within our multi-discipline approach. We bring in our medical partners and share behavioral health information as well. So we bring a holistic approach, comprehensive approach to helping our colleagues, particularly in this position, of course, with Africa, as they requested help with things like moral injury and PTSD, different counseling techniques that we can share with our colleagues. But we also, we do exchanges so that we're also learning from our colleagues in Africa who deal with deployments, separations, and combat action. We were down in Zambia in April with Chaplain Matafeo and 5 other countries, Botswana, Namibia, Malawi. We even had a chaplain come from the DRC, and at the conclusion of our meeting, and we were sharing prayers, with tears in his eyes, he said, "Please pray for us in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, for we have been at war for 35 years. And he was just asking for any way we could share information that we have and how to better take care of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines.
Sounds very profound, deep, but also emotional approach to this. As we navigate, you navigate this space, the navigation of foreign relations space, particularly security, defense and security, you face what we described earlier as the diversity of religious and societal values. So in the case you just described, DRC is heavily Christian, Zambia is heavily Christian, but other spaces that your command engages with, those are Muslims, those are different religious views that they share. How then do you engage as a command, but also as the lead chaplain with these armed forces that are partners of the United States?
Yes, Africa is a very complex continent with many different religions and traditions and cultures. Take Nigeria, for example, the largest populated country in Nigeria with 250 languages, with different sects of Christianity and Islam and traditional religions all mixing together. We were there in Nigeria in August, and we brought with us a delegation from the Department of State International Religious Freedoms Office. We had with us, as we were meeting in our U.S. Embassy there in Abuja with public diplomacy, we brought a Nigerian American Army chaplain with us, Roman Catholic priest, Chaplain Father John Ijeoma, as we met with the Nigerian Interfaith Religious Council that had Father Cornelius and Imam Adam and Pastor Sampson, all senior religious leaders of Nigeria, as well as the Nigerian Defense Forces Chief of Chaplains and a staff commodore from the defense staff. And we discussed some very hard issues. So we had quite a bit of diversity, as you can see around that table. And we discussed many things, the demands of military life, military on civilian casualties, that even just that relationship between military and civilian, military and government rulers. So it was a very deep conversation and a hard conversation, covering topics that that we all deal with. There are issues that we share universally as human beings that we struggle with. And when things happen, corruption, when there's accidents happen, when there's brutality that happens, as religious leaders, we can help in the process of reconciliation. We can, as military chaplains, help with the prevention of such things prior to them happening, by character development, ethical decision making, all those things that we try to work on in the U.S. Armed Forces, in our professional military education, in our training, and how chaplains integrate within that. I think, Nigeria is a great example of, how a country is like the sleeping giant that has so much potential for great prosperity in the coming years. And we as religious leaders, I think we see how we can, the more we can discuss these more difficult topics, that we can help to bring solutions and peace and stability and build those bridges between military and civilian, between government and military and civil society.
In the case you just described, Colonel Meeker, Nigeria, a complex society itself, you mentioned imam and pastors. What are the challenges then when you engage in those spaces, and how do you build the bridges that need to be built?
Yeah, the challenges with even just the complex issues that they're working in Nigeria in the north, with violent extremists coming into their country. This is creating instability, and so what's the role of the religious leaders? Well, the religious leaders are leaders within communities that can help with getting the proper information out, ensuring that if something does happen, that pastors, imams, priests can go together and bring calm to situations. And I know Father Cornelius shared several stories where he himself or others would go into highly contentious situations to try to bring factual information and try to bring calm among people. I know Father Haddad in Jordan at the Jordanian Interfaith Coexistence Center also did similar type work in Jordan, where he would go as a Christian into Muslim communities where there might have been a situation where people were rioting and some violence, and just bring calm by bringing religious leaders together. So if religious leaders have the courage to walk into those kinds of situations and to bring people together, if we do that, if we model that, then it can bring communities together that might be in conflict.
So we know across the continent, not just in Nigeria, across the Sahel, the herdsman versus farmers conflict, the Christian and Muslims in northern Nigeria, but we have Cabo Delgado with Al-Shabaab, and the list goes on. In Eastern DRC, you mentioned earlier. These frictions sometimes take on the appearance of religious conflict. Sometimes it's just one religion pushing its agenda on others. Conflict is often one group wanting to dominate another and the other saying no, one group feeling that they're being denied access. Are there avenues that you've seen where faith practitioners, whether they be in uniform like yourself or your civilian counterparts, have used to sue peace on behalf of their communities? And is there a role for your command to play?
Well, I think going back to Nigeria, I think that was, an example of bringing people to the table, and we spent over 3 hours just in that initial meeting talking through a range of contentious issues and spending the time to listen to each other. And from there, I think helping each other to learn and how we can bring those resources together to help each other. That time to talk and to listen builds understanding among different groups, and I think that's really critical. And then where we can bring in aid and support. The cultural understandings, it's often tied, as you said, to religion, and those communities of faith where things can get very impassioned, so that if us as religious leaders can come together and talk about what's happened and find solutions, then I think that's where we can have a role in bringing peace and stability.
The other element of this that we've not discussed is trust, or lack thereof. Mm-hmm. In our spaces, this is a think tank, we analyze those kind of dynamics. The US military moves into a space or comes in to build this partnership, but there's history. There's history of a country like the United States in certain parts of the world that is not necessarily the best, or that people do not always want to remember, or there may be grievances in that way. So as a woman of faith, as a faith practitioner, you're still wearing the uniform as you enter these spaces, and you may not carry a weapon, but your colleagues do. That's an area that needs a lot of work in terms of building this connection that go beyond what is on paper. What has been your experience in dealing with this mistrust or lack thereof, or need to build relationships of trust?
Yeah, trust is, that's really the currency for any relationship. And United States has a very generous heart, and I think that's who we are as America. We have given a lot. I heard the president speak at the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and I thought he made a comment that rings very true, that we're a caring and supportive and giving nation, but we're not entirely altruistic. We do have interests, and I think that can sometimes undermine the credibility if we can't come through with promises, or the expectation might be that we'll always be there. I read on the BBC of a man living in Sudan who suffering greatly for years, and he said, "I thought the United States would come," and it's just sad to read that. I think that many who suffer around the world dream of the United States coming to the rescue, and we can't be everywhere. So that trust and how we establish that trust, I think is very important. For me as a woman, as a U.S. Army chaplain, I've found around the world a lot of mutual respect meeting with religious leaders, even if they're not the same as me, like they're not Christian, but because I'm a religious leader and because I wear the uniform of the United States Army, a lot of respect. So I think within our armed forces, we have chaplains from all walks of faith, from all over the world, and we're trying to leverage that diversity within our missions that we do in Africa. So bringing Father John Ijeoma to Nigeria. He's Nigerian, he knows the people, he knows the land. He did engagements with Bishop Obi, a recently appointed Roman Catholic bishop, who was a former U.S. Army chaplain. So those engagements have just been very rich. And we're looking to utilize some of our imams in engagements in our Muslim partner countries that are mostly Muslim across Africa. So I think that's where we, build those bridges, is that using those commonalities can, I think, be a place to begin, where we use our diversity and really start to grow and learn together.
Your perspective is wide. You've served in the Republic of Korea, you've served in Germany, you serve now with Africa Command, you've been with CENTCOM. I would like to stay a little bit on decided spaces that are primarily non-Christian. So Jordan, CENTCOM, Tunisia. Can you talk a little more about how those engagements evolve? How do they pan out? How do they work out?
We have some, I think, great opportunities there that we're exploring. For instance, Morocco has a wonderful history of protecting those of different religious faiths. During World War II, Hitler asked the King of Morocco to send back the Jews. And King of Morocco said, "They're all Moroccans." In Tunisia, the island of Jerba has a mosque, a cathedral, and a synagogue. And again, I think that's a great representation of, here's a Muslim country, but there is protection for those who have other religions that they follow. And like I said, we do have imams. Our senior imam in the Department of Defense is Chaplain Shabazz, who's out in the Pacific right now. And we have an open door with the Minister of Islamic Affairs in Djibouti, that when he can come and visit, that he will be able to participate in Juma prayers in Djibouti and meet with the Minister of Islamic Affairs. So I think there's some great opportunities for us to use the wealth of diversity that we have within our Army, Navy, and Air Force chaplain corps, again, to build some strong relationships and great diplomatic bridges with our African nations. I would highlight too that we've used our state partnerships. There's a program called the State
Partnership Program.
SPPs.
Yes.
And we have right now more and more with our African nations. Just recently, DC, Army National Guard chaplain was in Burkina Faso, Chaplain Vincent Cummings, and he preceded the visit by the DC tag, General Blanchard, and Chaplain Cummings met with the Burkina Faso senior chaplain there, who is a close confidant of the president. So understanding that, religion takes a very prominent seat within most African nations, and understanding that culture where, in the United States, we've become more secular, and some may not understand that for a country like Burkina Faso or Zambia or Nigeria or name a country, that their faith is very important. We were in Zambia for global health engagement, and the Zambian leaders wanted every session to open with prayer. So they humble themselves before a holy God before they begin meetings. And so their chaplains can hold very high positions within their cabinets and be counselors to their senior national leaders. So our state partners have been able to have some of those relationships that go on for many years. New York Army National Guard is partnered with South Africa National Defense Forces. And while my office wasn't invited to a chaplain's meeting in South Africa, New York Army National Guard chaplains were. And so that's a way for us to have those diplomatic doors be open when our U.S. are at the federal level may be limited due to whatever foreign policy limitations might be in place. That may not be the case for some of our state partners, and that's been I think a really helpful for our country and our African partners to maintain U.S. relations.
Just for our audience, the State Partnership Program is a program of U.S. military cooperation between countries and national guards of various states in the United States. And this involves both military, but also soft power engagement that this National Guard unit do across these countries. The question, one question that we like to know about is culture, right? Culture is the foundation of society, and religion is an important pillar of culture. The armed forces, regardless of the country, whether it's the United States or other countries, it's its own culture. We can call it subculture or martial culture, whatever adjective we want to add to it. So from your perspective, how does religion shape this culture, this military culture, if we just stay in that space that you have charge of, the men and women in uniform? that culture, whether it's U.S. military, which you're very familiar with, or the other kind. So how does religion shape that space, and how should policymakers engage in those?
Well, in the shaping piece first, many of our service members join the military, speaking on the United States side, out of an act of faith. They're responding to a calling and purpose to serve the nation in the uniform of the United States. So it's very important, again, because of the mission that it requires our service members and their families to make enormous amounts of sacrifice to meet that mission to defend our country. Faith can become and is very important to many of our service members and their families. So that's definitely a shaper. Lacordaire, the French evangelist, said that the soldier's vocation is next to the priesthood in intent and sacrifice. And I think many of our service members who do follow a faith would resonate with that saying. For our African partners, where religion is very important, and a majority of their country and their service members are part of a religious community, it definitely shapes that culture of service. Some have described military service as really a love story, where there's this love that's so deep for freedom, for one another, for peace, that one is willing to give their life in that service, and that comes from a life of faith, that to make that kind of sacrifice. And Benjamin Okonofua, who's one of our assessment analysts here at AFRICOM, has written a very thoughtful article on spirituality and religion on the African continent, and he gives several examples in Africa and its history of how some of the heroes in some of the countries have acted far above what you would think they would be able to do because of their faith that gave them almost a superpower. And I think if you look at the heroes of our military, of our nation, many of them were people of deep faith. Even as Washington D.C. is honoring our 39th president, Jimmy Carter, right now in the Capitol Rotunda. I mean, Jimmy Carter was a man of deep, deep faith, and with a great legacy in Africa. So much of what he did was out of love of God and love for his fellow man. Speaking of, his legacy in Africa, he said that the U.S. had forgotten Africa. Well, he did everything he could so that Africa would not be forgotten. One of our staff members yesterday mentioned in a meeting how Jimmy Carter made it a mission, a personal mission of his and then of the Carter Center, to eradicate the guinea worm that was infecting millions of people in Africa, particularly in the Sudan region. And I think there's only been recently 4 cases that have been recorded. So that was his goal, to eradicate, and it's almost at that point. So I think, religion absolutely shapes. We wouldn't have the United States of America. Our country was founded because people were looking for religious freedom. And our first freedom is that free exercise of religion. So it's deeply on who we are. And I think that's what makes it so powerful when we have these connections with fellow religious leaders and religious communities in Africa. I think sometimes there's a concern that America's lost its soul. You know, when you watch the news or Hollywood, there's a certain perception there. But when we go in as religious leaders and we can find those commonalities, we had 8 chaplains, U.S. chaplains, Army and Air Force and Navy in Lusaka, Zambia in April. And we went into 8 different churches and were well received by thousands of Zambians. And I think there was a feeling of America is okay because we put a face in a worshiping community. That we do have many shared values, and there are things that we can do together to help both of our countries. There's a scripture verse that says from Jeremiah that to pray for the place to which you have been sent, for in its well-being you will find yours, and I believe that's true.
One truism that always comes up, you know, it's the Latin saying, "Civis pacem para bellum." If you want peace, you prepare for war. So here I want to see if you can help us reconcile a few things here. You know, the many people who believe that the U.S. is investing too much money overseas in military engagement and security engagement and so on. But civis pacem para bellum is really the objective of the military is to prevent war. But preparing for war has a lot of tension. You prepare for war, that means blood and sweat. When you go into war, there's blood and sweat. And yet, you were talking earlier about the military service being a story of love, an allegory of love. It's an allegory of sacrifice, because people die, people protect each other. But there's a lot of contradiction there. You know, there's a lot of killing, there's a lot of sacrifice, and often people ask, what for?
There's a lot of suffering around our world and throughout history, and that's one of the most difficult questions is, you know, why is there so much suffering, so much pain? We've been talking about religion, and in my scriptures in the New Testament, religion is defined, pure religion is defined by helping the destitute. And, you know, religion has great capacity for good, and also in the wrong hands can have great capacity for evil. And you could say that with any institution, and certainly with the military, there's a lot of power, there's a lot of authority there. And so having that aspect where there's a humility before a holy God, that the decisions that are made could cost many, many lives. I know the commanders that I've worked with, that burden of command is very heavy, because they know that the decisions that they make, that people will get hurt, that there will be people that die. Even on Christmas Eve, there was a strike on an al-Shabaab leader in Somalia. Someone had to make that decision, and then a service member had to make that, had to do that target. Those are really heavy decisions that if we don't, I believe if we don't have a certain humility and a certain ethical foundation, we can have all the hardware, all the technology, but at the end of the day, it's human beings that have to make very difficult decisions that we pray is for the betterment of communities and nations in our world. General Milley, when he was the Chief of Staff of the Army, gave an eloquent speech at the Eisenhower Luncheon at the AUSA convention, and at the end of his speech, he said, as we prepare for war, we pray for peace. So just like our Army War College, we study war so that there will be peace. And I think we always, every day, have to keep that in front of us, that it's a very challenging world out there, with disease and conflict and power struggles. But it's up to every generation to meet that need. 80 years ago, the greatest generation, met one of the greatest challenges in our American history. And I think that same demand is today for our generation to bring the solutions to some of the world's hardest problems. And Africa has been described as the apex of the great competition, where you see China and Russia and violent extremist groups all converging on a continent, as I said earlier, that has tremendous potential, but also biblically proportioned crises.
We also live in a time of culture wars, and I think different generations face their own culture wars. Today it's a spectrum, everything from gay rights to the issues. So, and the US military is open to members of all religion and creeds and beliefs and so on, including atheists. As a chaplain, you are not just a spiritual advisor to the command and so on, you are also an advisor to thousands of service members who, I suppose, come to you with a set of issues, personal and often not even religious, but that address the soul of a human being and their survival. Often in the military, it's about surviving the next 4 hours. It's not even about surviving the day. How do you, as a chaplain, approach these issues or these fellow military personnel who are in need for both spiritual, psychological, or otherwise?
As chaplains, that's our most sacred honor, is to provide that direct support to the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guard, Space Force guardians, civilians, family members. It's a great honor to be able to provide that support. As chaplains, we have confidential counseling, so anyone can come in and unburden their soul of whatever might be on their mind and their heart. Our AFRICOM chaplain team, we see it every day as just a great honor and opportunity for us to avail ourselves to whomever is in need. So we never lose sight of that mission, whether we're walking down the sidewalk at Kelly Barracks, or whether we're in Djibouti or in Nigeria or Ghana. We're gonna be taking care of our folks. We have service members like our young Marines on the security detachments in the 37 U.S. embassies across Africa. They're in isolated locations, and whenever we get a chaplain team down, that's the first thing on the list, is to take care of our service members and our teams that are working in our embassies out there, and other service members and teams that are doing their missions across Africa. Our Special Operations Africa Chaplain Hessling, and his team have partnered in Ghana with the Ghanaian chaplains, and they brought over the Delaware Army National Guard Chaplain Addison, who married a Ghanaian king, and is a queen of several Ashanti villages in Ghana. And oh my goodness, the Ghanaian chaplains they were just so ecstatic. So when we send a mission, we're taking care of our folks no matter what needs they might have. And then we're working together with our military colleagues and partner nations. And then we're reaching out to religious leaders if we can get those connections in the African partners. And as we start those relationships, we just want to build them and build a strategy on things that we can work on, not just one visit, but for years ahead.
This is a commitment. We will take questions, Colonel, from our audience. We've had a couple questions come through here. The first one is, how does religion in Africa influence bias and legislation against LGBTQ individuals and communities in some countries? And then the second question is, what role does religion play in fostering reconciliation and peace in post-conflict regions where AFRICOM operates? Can you give us example in which religious communication and your role played a role in resolving or stabilizing a crisis?
I think just like our country that is constantly evolving with different cultural changes and things that are happening, African nations deal with those same issues. As the United States, we're not the same that we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. My grandmother didn't even have the right to vote, early in her life. So just those kinds of things like giving women's rights. We've dealt with those things in our own country, and African nations are dealing with those same types of cultural and value changes and tension. So I think, how do we approach that as the United States government and United States Africa Command? We are who we are. We come with our diversity, and we're transparent about that. We have dignity and respect for all people, and so it makes me proud as an American when we do it right, and when we don't, we're upfront about that and honest about it. I would say, and I think that builds trust. We sent our United States, Africa, and Europe chaplains, Chaplain Barclay and Chaplain Law Gordon, our secret weapon across Africa, just a dynamic chaplain down to Gabon, and worked with our Gabonese chaplains. And they were working Christian to Christian, Protestant to Protestant, and our embassy asked for more diversity within our chaplains and the Gabonese, and so we're working, to bring a more religiously ecumenical religious leaders around that table. So again, we do it in concert with our chaplain teams from the military, U.S. military, the African host nation, and our embassy teams, the ambassador with his or her team in the various countries. They live there each and every day. So we're very careful to listen again and take the lead of those who are there on the ground. We want to do good. I think taking that Hippocratic first line from Hippocrates, do good, do no harm. So that's definitely a guiding principle for how we conduct business. And then the second part of your question was,
the role religion plays in fostering reconciliation and peace in post-conflict regions where AFRICOM operates. And if you have any example where religious communication and your role played, helped resolve and stabilize a crisis. We have about 2 minutes to go.
we sent a team to Uganda, and a chaplain team, Chaplain Eric Bryan from Stuttgart here, Army chaplain, along with now Chaplain Daisy Smith, a Ugandan American from New York Army National Guard. It was an initial visit that they made with the embassy, but our hope is that they'll be able to have additional meetings with Ugandan military leaders and religious leaders to help in any way that we can help with situations that they've had recently in Uganda, as well as Rwanda. We know that they have several pastors there who have been working specifically on reconciliation with the past genocide there that they're still dealing with in Rwanda. No finalized good news stories there yet, but those are areas that we hope that U.S. and Ugandan, Rwandan, and even Ethiopia, the second most populated country in Africa with a rich history and militarily and religiously, that we hope that we can build some bridges there for their reconciliation. And again, where we can learn from our African partners as they deal with these just really enormous challenges, and learn together and help each other.
Moving forward, as the U.S. continue to expand its presence on the continent on this diverse space that you have described so well over the last hour, what are the three things that policymakers and citizens should know? Just three things that you think we should know, should help.
So I think we can get a very far way if we use commonalities within the diversity of our United States and our United States military. We can get a lot done inexpensively by utilizing our religious leaders, our chaplains in the military, mill to mill, and our religious communities and our shared values. And there are some of our great competitors that can't even compete on this. The communists have no play on this field. So, and then there's others like the Russian Orthodox Church, that's a Putin proxy that, again, we come transparent. We may come slow with our bureaucracy, but we're gonna get things done over time that will be lasting, that will be quality, that can be trusted. So I would say, thirdly, we can establish some chaplain centers of excellence that can be multidisciplinary, that can be multinational, where we can come together and learn from each other, where we can share from our vast experience in the United States military chaplaincies and help our partners, and in so doing, help us as well.
Colonel Karen Meeker, Command Chaplain at U.S. Africa Command in Stuttgart, Germany, we'd like to thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights and perspective. And also to our audience at home or wherever else you join us from, we'd like to thank you for being part of this discussion. Thank you. This concludes our session.